The Freckled Gardener, a short story by Krista Schade, read by the author. My hands dug deep into the bare ground and released the wet, tangy aroma of rich soil that always brought with it a sense of peace. After mere moments, the mix of damp, springy grass beneath my knees, the pleasing stretch in my back, and that sweet, earthy smell combined to lower my heart rate. I relished the wash of peace that enveloped me as my mind cleared, fixating only on turning the soil, folding in tiny round pills of fertilizer, and loosening the compacted bed, ready for planting. The sun warmed my back as it rose, higher and higher in the sky as I toiled. Birds fluttered about me, and bees busied themselves in the long hedge of lavender, one of my first successes in this garden more than 30 years ago. The garden used to be my sanctuary, my place to escape the confines of the walls of the house, where lay a consistent and constant pattern of anger, remorse, fragile peace, and then eggshell walking until the anger cycle swung back around again. Now it is my sole domain, mine alone for the past decade, since the last child flew the proverbial nest. The anger had long gone too, slamming the door behind him and leaving me to raise our children and pay down our shared debts, which I did because what else was there to do? I worked and juggled and parented, and when I needed to escape it all, I gardened. To begin with, I knew very little, but I read, I watched, I learned, and I used trial and error to full advantage until slowly my oasis began to emerge. My role as a parent and landscaper came to a natural conclusion together, and with it a suddenness that I wasn't expecting. Once yearned for, the silence inside and the lack of major projects outside hit me with a loneliness that was extraordinarily unexpected. That's when the anxiety set in. It did not have the good grace to descend slowly, respectfully. It arrived with a sudden force that sometimes left me breathless, paralysed and unable to speak. The panic arrived unbidden and uninvited, yet it gripped me as ferociously as he had first clenched me as a new bride. I'm well read, I'm woke, as my grandchildren say. I knew it wasn't weak to speak up, but the advice from my harried GP was unsatisfying in its generic blandness. I tried the suggested exercise, socialising, mindfulness and the prescription drugs. But the Tai Chi class was full of old people groaning and ignoring the help of the instructor. Making new friends was hard and only intensified the fizzing panic in my chest. I tried online meditation courses that my daughter-in-law recommended, but my mind raced so madly I wondered if I was doing it right, and yet the pills made me feel like my brain was in slow motion. So instead, I pulled the garden apart. 3 years ago in early spring, I started at the back of the house, and each year I slowly progressed down the yard towards the back fence. As I deconstructed my garden and then rebuilt it, I rebuilt myself. I leaned into the physicality of digging, lugging and carting, and in the evenings I planned and sketched. I researched and ordered plants. I took long drives into the countryside, strolling through open gardens and parks, seeking inspiration everywhere I visited. Today was just for pottering. This part of the garden was given over to vegetables and fruits in a spiral pattern of raised beds with hand-laid brick pathways. I had tapped and levelled each terracotta square, and I loved how they felt cool under my bare feet despite the day growing warmer. The rustle behind me could have been happening for a while now, I realised. It had crept up in volume until I could no longer ignore it. But it had been a background sound, white noise, behind me as I dug and scraped the soil. Sitting back on my haunches, I swung my body around towards where the swish, swish, swish noise was coming from. A small face peered back at me between a split in the palings of the fence. A small, grubby face. "What you doing?" The voice was soft, inquisitive, yet slightly hesitant, as if he was afraid of being scolded. I guessed him to be maybe 8 years old. I had seen him among the children playing in the scruffy yard next door, so I assumed he was my neighbour. Planting vegetables, I answered. He scratched at his messy locks and cocked his head to one side. Why? So I can eat them. The little head rocked to the opposite side as he digested his information. Don't you go to the shops? I do, but these vegetables taste much better. To illustrate this, I plucked a round red strawberry from the sprawling bush to my left and passed it through a gap in the fence. He eyed it suspiciously for a moment before taking it from me. He inspected it carefully and lowered his nose to the berry, sniffing loudly. It's got the green bit on it, he said. Impatiently, I snatched the ripe strawberry back from him and tore off the top leaves before shoving it back through the fence. There, I said, not very kindly. I took the green bit off. Now try it. He tentatively bit into the berry and chewed thoughtfully. Yum, he eventually announced. I picked 2 more from the bush and passed them to him, reminding him to pull off the green bit, before I turned my back on our shared fence and continued to dig in the soil. The rustling behind me did not continue, and I wasn't sure if I was relieved or disappointed. I used to love picking strawberries with my own kids when the patch was as young as they once were. I continued to dig, losing myself to wandering thoughts and the rhythm of my task, before a voice beside me caused me to gasp aloud. Can I help? I clutched at my chest, clad in my sun-safe shirt, and exhaled loudly before saying, Oh, you frightened me. I looked around, but the child was alone. Did you come through my side gate? I asked, again with less kindness than was warranted. The child nodded. Can I help? Does your mother know you're over here? I scanned along the fence. A couple of older children were lolling on a small trampoline next door, but no adult was inside. Dunno, he answered. Can I help? I looked up at the child, the spring sunshine behind him and his eyes hopeful. I looked across at the neat rows of small plants ready to be transplanted, then back to the boy. I stood and wiped my dirt-covered hands on my ancient denim shorts to clean them. The boy stared up at me, his little mouth a grim, tight line as he braced to be hunted home. Come on, I said. Let's go and check with your mother first. If she says it's all right, you can come back and help me for a while. The delight shone across his face, instantly illuminating the freckles that danced across the bridge of his nose. I'll race you, he said.